Welcome back, everyone, to another deep dive. We are tackling a big one today, exploring the Buddhist path to practice.
Okay.
And specifically, we're going to be looking at the Noble Eightfold Path and the concept of right immersion, which is also known as jhana.
Right.
And we have some really interesting sources for this one.
Yeah, we do.
Um, One of them even describes the path to enlightenment as indulging in pleasure.
It does.
So that sounds kind of counterintuitive, right?
It does go against what we typically think about when we're thinking about spiritual practice.
Right.
But that's what makes this such an interesting deep dive, I think.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So whether you're trying to deepen your understanding of Buddhist philosophy or just curious about this unique approach to personal transformation, we're going to break it all down for you today.
Absolutely. And we'll start by kind of taking a look at the Noble Eightfold Path and all the factors that make it up.
Okay.
And then we'll move into the four jhanas,
Okay.
which are these states of meditative absorption and how they actually relate to the path itself.
Okay. Sounds like a plan.
Yeah.
Now, I've heard a lot about this idea of jhana being about, forcing your mind onto a single object, like some extreme concentration.
Yeah.
Is that accurate?
That's a common misconception. And,
Yeah.
and our important source actually really emphasizes that the Buddha never taught jhana as a forced mental technique.
Okay.
So it's not about, trying to wrestle your mind into submission.
So how does it work?
Well, think of it more as like a natural unfolding.
Okay.
So jhana arises from, a very holistic practice
Okay.
of cultivating virtue, wisdom, and skillful mental states through, the entirety of the Eightfold Path.
So it's like setting the stage for it to happen naturally.
Exactly. It's like, creating the perfect conditions for a seed to sprout.
Right.
You can't force it. You can only kind of nurture the ground and provide the right environment for it to just grow organically.
Okay. That makes a lot more sense.
Yeah.
So let's talk about this Eightfold Path then.
Yeah.
We have some great sources like the Great 40 and analysis that lay out these 8 factors.
They do.
Right view, right thought, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right immersion.
Yeah, and it's interesting because they're not just like separate steps or a checklist
Okay.
that you go through.
Right.
They're all interconnected.
Okay.
So each factor is supporting and influencing the others like threads woven together to create, a beautiful tapestry.
I like that. Yeah, and the Great 40 actually uses the analogy of a wheel to describe this.
It does.
It says that right view is like the hub,
Yes.
sets the direction for all the other factors.
Yeah.
Which are like spokes radiating outwards.
Exactly. And, the source actually highlights 3 factors
Okay.
as being the driving forces behind this whole wheel. And those are right view, right effort, and right mindfulness.
Yeah.
And, they're like the engine
Okay.
that keeps the wheel of the path turning towards liberation.
So how do those 3 kind of guide the other 5?
Well, you can think about it this way. Right view provides the understanding,
Okay.
clarity of what the path is and where it leads.
Okay.
Right? Effort is the energy, the commitment to actually walking that path.
Mm-hmm.
And right mindfulness is the awareness, the attentiveness that keeps us present and engaged on that journey.
So without those 3, the other 5 factors would be like a ship without a rudder.
Exactly.
So drifting aimlessly.
Lost at sea.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
So how does this play out in practice?
Yeah.
Let's take right speech for an example.
Okay.
So right speech, it's more than just, avoiding saying mean things, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
So the Great 40 describes wrong speech as anything that is false, divisive, harsh, or meaningless.
Okay.
So right speech is about cultivating the opposite.
Okay.
Speaking truthfully, kindly, and in a way that promotes, harmony and understanding.
So it's like being mindful of the impact that our words have on ourselves and others.
Exactly. And that mindfulness is guided by those 3 core factors that we talked about. Right view, right effort, and right mindfulness.
Okay.
So with right view, we understand the power of our words to create either suffering or well-being.
Okay.
With right effort, we commit to speaking skillfully even when it's challenging.
Mm-hmm.
And with right mindfulness, we pay attention to our speech in the moment, catching ourselves before we say something hurtful or untrue.
So we're constantly refining our speech, almost using it as a tool for positive transformation.
Exactly. And this same principle applies to right action and right livelihood.
Okay, let's dive into those.
Yeah.
So right action, as I understand it, it's about our physical conduct,
Yes.
our behavior in the world.
Yeah. The Great 40 is very clear about what constitutes wrong action.
Okay.
It's killing, stealing, and sexual misconduct.
Okay.
So right action is about abstaining from those harmful behaviors.
So aligning our actions with, our ethical understanding of what's right and skillful.
Exactly. And again, those three guiding factors are crucial here.
Okay.
Right? View provides that moral compass, showing us the path of harmlessness. Right?
Mm.
Effort is the energy that propels us towards that path, even when faced with temptation.
Okay.
And right, mindfulness is like that watchful guardian, helping us to see clearly the consequences of our actions before we actually act.
So it's not just about, avoiding bad things,
Yeah.
but actively cultivating skillful qualities through our actions.
You got it.
Okay.
Now, right livelihood might seem a little less obvious to think about spiritual practice,
Yeah.
but it's actually incredibly important.
Because how we make a living can either support or hinder, our journey on the path.
Precisely. The Great 40 describes wrong livelihood as any occupation that involves deceit,
Okay.
flattery, manipulating others for personal gain, or pursuing material wealth through unethical means.
So essentially, any way of making a living that harms or exploits others would be considered wrong livelihood.
Exactly, right. Livelihood then is about finding ways to earn a living that are ethical, honest, and don't cause harm. It's about aligning our work with our values and contributing to the well-being of others.
And I imagine those three guiding factors also play a role here.
Absolutely. Right view helps us to see the interconnectedness of all beings.
Okay.
And to understand the impact that our work has on the world.
Sure.
Right? Effort is the dedication to finding or creating work that aligns with our ethical values. And mindfulness keeps us aware of how our work is affecting us and others,
Right.
helping us to make adjustments as needed.
So, view, effort, and mindfulness are really like the foundation, the guiding principles.
They are the heart of the practice.
Yeah, that shape all the other factors of the path.
And when cultivated together, they create this really powerful synergy
Okay.
that leads to a profound transformation of our entire being.
And this is where it gets really interesting, because this transformation is what ultimately leads to right immersion or jhana.
Exactly. Remember that analogy of stilling muddy water?
Yeah.
Well, the first 7 factors of the Eightfold Path, right view, right thought, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, and right mindfulness,
Yeah.
they're what allow the mud to settle.
Okay.
They purify the mind, creating that stillness and clarity that's necessary for right immersion to kind of naturally emerge.
So it's not about forcing ourselves into some kind of trance state.
Yeah.
It's about creating those right conditions internally through ethical conduct-wise, understanding, and skillful mental states.
Precisely. And once those conditions are in place,
Okay.
right, immersion or jhana arises effortlessly,
Okay.
like a lotus blossom opening on a still pond.
I love that analogy.
Yeah.
Okay, so I am definitely ready to dive deeper into these jhanas now.
Okay.
We have a couple sources that describe them in detail, including the longer discourse at Asapura.
Right.
And from what I've gathered, they're not just about deep concentration,
Yeah.
actually characterized by these really incredible states of bliss and pleasure.
Yeah. And that's where things get really fascinating, especially when you consider that one of our sources, indulgence and pleasure,
Right.
describes jhana as a form of indulging in pleasure.
Yeah, that's the part that I don't quite get yet.
Right. It might seem paradoxical
Yeah.
in the context of spiritual practice,
Right.
but it's definitely a concept worth exploring.
Yeah, it definitely piques my curiosity.
Yeah.
So how can something as seemingly indulgent as pleasure be a path to enlightenment?
That's a great question, and it's one that we'll, dive into more deeply in the next part of our deep dive.
Okay.
But for now, let's just keep in mind that the pleasure experienced in jhana is not the fleeting sensory kind of pleasure
Okay.
that we usually associate with indulgence.
So it's not about indulging our desires in the typical sense.
Not at all. The pleasure of jhana arises from something much deeper,
Okay.
from a very profound letting go, a release from those attachments and cravings that bind us to suffering.
Okay.
It's a kind of bliss that's born from stillness, clarity, and a deep connection to the true nature of reality.
Wow. Okay. I'm already starting to see how this could be a powerful path to transformation.
It is. And as we explore these 4 jhanas in more detail, you'll see how this indulgence in pleasure actually becomes a catalyst for awakening and liberation.
I can't wait to hear more. This is already so insightful.
I'm glad you're finding it engaging.
Yeah.
We've covered a lot of ground in this first part of our deep dive,
Yeah.
but there's still so much more to explore.
Absolutely. We've laid the groundwork, unpacking the Eightfold Path and highlighting those 3 crucial guiding factors: right view, right effort, and right mindfulness.
Yeah.
And now I'm eager to delve into those four jhanas and uncover the secrets of this so-called indulgence in pleasure.
Sounds good. Let's do it.
Yep.
Yeah, it really is fascinating how, these ancient practices offer like such a different perspective on pleasure.
Yeah, it's like we've been looking for treasure in the wrong place all along.
Yeah.
So let's dive into these jhanas.
Okay.
What exactly are they, and how do we actually experience them?
So the longer discourse at Asapura gives us like a really vivid description of the four jhanas. The first jhana is characterized by a state of rapture and bliss.
Okay.
So imagine like a warm bath
Okay.
where the warm water envelops you and every cell in your body just like relaxes and softens.
Right.
That's the kind of feeling we're talking about here.
Okay, I'm already feeling more relaxed just picturing that.
Right.
But how do we get there?
Yeah.
Is it just, sit down and try to feel blissful?
Not quite. Remember those 7 factors we discussed earlier?
Yeah.
They're really essential for creating the internal conditions for jhana.
Okay.
When we cultivate virtue, wisdom, and those skillful mental states,
Yeah.
it's like we're clearing away all of that mental clutter that prevents us from accessing these deeper states of consciousness.
So those first 7 factors are like the preparation, the groundwork,
Yeah.
and then the jhanas are the natural outcome.
Exactly. And the first jhana arises when we separate ourselves from sensual pleasures and unskillful qualities.
Okay.
So the Buddha describes it as, being devoid of sensuality and unskillful qualities. Meaning, we've moved beyond the pull of our usual desires and distractions.
So it's not about suppressing those desires. It's about transcending them, moving into a place where they no longer have power over us.
Beautifully put. And in that space, this incredible sense of rapture and bliss just naturally arises.
Oh, okay.
It's like we've tapped into this wellspring of joy that was always there, just hidden beneath the surface of our busy minds.
Wow. Okay, so what happens next?
Yeah.
What's the second jhana like?
So the second jhana takes us even deeper.
Okay.
The initial rapture subsides.
Okay.
And we enter the state of profound inner stillness and clarity.
Okay.
The Buddha uses the simile of like a spring-fed lake to describe this jhana.
Okay.
So the water is crystal clear, and there's just this deep sense of tranquility and peace.
So if the first jhana is like a warm bath,
Yeah.
the second is like a cool, refreshing dip in a crystal clear lake.
I love that analogy.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is that this clarity arises not from focusing on a single object, but from transcending even that initial placing of the mind.
Okay.
So it's a state of just pure awareness,
Okay.
unburdened by thought or distraction.
That sounds incredibly peaceful,
It is.
but is there still a sense of pleasure in this state?
Absolutely. In fact, the longer discourse at Asapura describes the pleasure of the second jhana as like even more refined and exquisite than the first.
Wow.
So it's a deeper, more subtle kind of joy that arises from this profound inner stillness.
Okay, I'm starting to understand how this indulgence and pleasure isn't about seeking external gratification,
Yeah.
but rather discovering this really profound inner bliss that's already within us.
Exactly. And as we move into the third jhana,
Okay.
this sense of bliss deepens even further, and we enter a state of profound equanimity.
So it's not just about, feeling good, but also about cultivating a sense of balance and stability.
Precisely. The longer discourse at Asakura describes the third jhana as mindful and equanimous, experiencing bliss with the body.
Okay.
So it's a state where we're fully present, fully aware, and yet completely at peace.
That sounds almost superhuman.
Right.
Is this even attainable for, ordinary people?
The Buddha taught that these states are accessible to anyone who's willing to put in the effort to cultivate the Eightfold Path and purify the mind.
Okay.
And remember, our important source emphasizes that jhana is not some special ability reserved for monks or advanced practitioners.
Okay.
It's a natural potential within all of us.
That's encouraging to hear.
Yeah.
So we've got rapture and bliss in the first jhana,
Yeah.
stillness, clarity in the second,
Mm-hmm.
and equanimity and bliss in the third.
Yes.
What about the fourth jhana?
Okay.
What's that like?
So the fourth jhana is the culmination of this journey into these deeper states of consciousness.
Okay.
It's a state of pure equanimity and mindfulness,
Okay.
where we've completely transcended both pleasure and pain.
So there's no feeling at all in the fourth jhana.
Not exactly. It's more that we've moved beyond the duality of pleasure and pain. We're no longer caught in that push and pull of, our emotions.
Okay.
The Buddha describes it as neither pleasure nor pain.
Okay.
And he uses the simile of like someone wrapped in a pure white cloth
Okay.
to symbolize like the purity and brightness of the state.
Wow, that's a powerful image.
It is.
So if we reach the fourth jhana, We've essentially reached enlightenment.
It's not quite that simple.
Okay.
The jhanas are like incredible tools for
Uh-huh.
cultivating concentration and insight,
Okay.
but they're not the end goal in themselves.
Okay.
The true goal of Buddhist practice is liberation from suffering,
Right.
which involves not just, experiencing these states of consciousness,
Okay.
but also, developing wisdom and compassion.
So the jhanas are like stepping stones on the path,
Exactly.
but not the destination itself.
Yes, and indulgence in pleasure makes this clear by outlining the benefits of jhana practice.
Okay.
So it describes how, those who experience the four jhanas can attain various stages of awakening, leading ultimately to complete liberation.
Okay, let's talk about those benefits then.
Yeah.
What are the stages of awakening, and how do the jhanas help us to reach them?
So the stages of awakening are outlined in another one of our sources, 4 states of awakening according to the Buddha.
Okay.
And it describes, the path from stream enterer
Okay.
to once returner,
Okay.
non-returner,
Yeah.
and finally arahant,
Okay.
the fully awakened one.
And these stages are like milestones on the path to liberation.
Exactly. Each stage represents a deepening of our understanding
Okay.
and a lessening of our attachment to the illusion of self.
Yep.
And the jhanas, with their incredible power to cultivate concentration and insight,
Yeah.
help to propel us through these stages.
So it's like the jhanas are like rocket fuel for our spiritual journey.
I love that analogy.
Yeah.
And it's important to remember that indulgence in pleasure emphasizes that this indulgence isn't about seeking gratification,
Okay.
but rather about experiencing a kind of pleasure that arises from letting go.
So the pleasure of jhana is actually a byproduct of detachment,
Yes,
of freeing ourselves from the craving that causes suffering.
precisely. It's a paradox, but it's at the heart of Buddhist practice.
Wow.
The more we let go of our attachments, the more we experience true joy and liberation.
This is all so fascinating.
It is.
But I'm wondering, how does this indulgence in pleasure actually lead to those stages of awakening?
Yeah.
What's the connection?
That's a great question, and it's one that we'll explore in more detail in the next part of our deep dive.
Okay.
But for now, let's just say that the jhanas cultivate a profound stillness and clarity of mind.
Okay.
And from that stillness and clarity, wisdom and insight naturally arise.
So jhanas are like fertile ground for the seeds of wisdom to sprout and grow.
Exactly. And that wisdom is what ultimately liberates us from suffering and leads to true awakening.
This has been incredibly insightful. We've
Yeah.
explored the 4 jhanas, these incredibly powerful states of meditative absorption. And we've begun to uncover the paradoxical nature of jhana pleasure.
Yes.
Now, I'm really eager to connect all of this back to those stages of awakening and see how this indulgence in pleasure can actually be a path to liberation.
Me too.
All right, so we've journeyed through the Eightfold Path, explored those 4 incredible jhanas,
We have.
and now I'm really curious to see how this all connects to the stages of awakening and ultimately to liberation.
Yeah, it's like we've been gathering all these puzzle pieces, and now it's time to see how they fit together
Exactly.
to reveal that bigger picture.
So let's start with those stages of awakening that are outlined in 4 states of awakening according to the Buddha.
Okay.
We've got stream enterer, once returner, non-returner, and finally arahant.
Yeah.
What do these actually mean in terms of personal transformation?
So think of it as like a gradual process of waking up to the
Okay.
true nature of reality.
Okay.
So the stream enterer has like glimpsed the truth of suffering and the path to liberation.
Okay.
They've entered the stream, so to speak, and are destined for full awakening, even if it takes many lifetimes.
So they've crossed a major threshold.
Absolutely. And then we have the once returner,
Okay.
who's made even more progress.
Okay.
They've weakened their attachments to the point where they'll only be reborn in the human realm one more time
Okay.
before reaching full liberation.
Wow. So they're almost there.
They're getting close. And then there's the non-returner,
Oh, I got
who
it.
has reached a level of liberation where they won't be reborn in any realm of suffering.
Okay.
So they'll attain full awakening in a higher realm of existence.
So they've essentially escaped the cycle of birth and death.
Yes. And finally, we have the arahant, the fully awakened one.
Okay.
They've completely extinguished all attachments
Okay.
and realized full liberation in this very lifetime.
That's the ultimate goal, right?
It is. And the jhanas, with their ability to cultivate profound concentration and insight,
Yeah.
are incredibly powerful tools for moving through these stages.
So how does this all connect back to the idea of indulging in pleasure?
Right.
How can experiencing pleasure, even the refined kind of pleasure that's found in jhana, lead to liberation?
That's where things get really interesting. Remember, the pleasure of jhana arises from letting go,
Okay.
from releasing those attachments that bind us to suffering.
Right.
And each stage of awakening involves a further letting go,
Okay.
a deeper understanding of the impermanent and illusory nature of the self.
So the more we let go, the more we experience true joy and freedom.
Exactly. And indulgence and pleasure highlights this connection by stating that those who experience the jhanas are living, indulging in pleasure
Oh,
because they've tasted a kind of joy that's beyond the fleeting pleasures of the senses.
It's like they've discovered a secret source of happiness that most people don't even know exists.
And it's a source that's available to anyone who is willing to cultivate the Eightfold Path and purify the mind.
So it's not about seeking pleasure for its own sake,
No.
but rather about experiencing a kind of pleasure that arises naturally from a life lived in alignment with wisdom and compassion.
Beautifully put. And this is where our important source really shines a light on the profound implications of this indulgence.
Okay.
It emphasizes that the pleasure experienced in jhana is not merely a pleasant sensation,
Okay.
but a direct experience of the truth of liberation.
So it's not just about feeling good.
No.
It's about awakening to a deeper reality.
Exactly. The pleasure of jhana is like a glimpse of the freedom and joy that's possible when we break free from the chains of our attachments and delusions.
That's such a powerful concept, but I have to admit, it's still a bit mind-boggling.
Yeah.
How can something as simple as experiencing pleasure lead to such profound transformation?
Think of it this way.
Okay.
Imagine you spent your whole life believing that the world is flat.
Okay.
Then one day you climb a mountain and you see the curvature of the earth for the first time.
Okay.
That experience would completely shatter your previous belief system and open up a whole new understanding of reality.
Okay, I see what you're saying. So the jhanas are like climbing that mountain. They give us a direct experience of a reality that's beyond our ordinary perceptions.
That's a great way to put it. And the pleasure we experience in those states is like the awe and wonder we might feel when we see the vastness of the world from that mountaintop.
It's a glimpse of something much bigger than ourselves, something that transcends our limited understanding.
Precisely. And that experience can be profoundly transformative,
Yeah.
leading to a shift in our values, our priorities, and our entire way of being in the world.
This has been such an incredible deep dive. We've explored this intricate path of Buddhist practice, from the ethical foundation of the Eightfold Path to the profound states of consciousness known as the jhanas.
It has.
And we've even uncovered the paradoxical nature of jhana pleasure and its role in the journey to liberation.
It's been a fascinating exploration, and I really hope our listeners have gained like a deeper appreciation for the richness and depth of Buddhist philosophy and practice.
Absolutely. And as we wrap up, I'd love to leave our listeners with a final thought. We've talked a lot about indulging in pleasure in the context of jhana, but how can we bring this concept into our everyday lives? How can we cultivate a kind of pleasure that's not dependent on external circumstances or fleeting sensations, but rather arises from a deep sense of inner peace and freedom?
That's a wonderful question to ponder. Perhaps it starts with cultivating those core factors of the Eightfold Path.
Okay.
Right view, right effort, and right mindfulness in everything we do.
Okay.
Maybe it involves finding ways to let go of our attachments,
Yeah.
to simplify our lives, and to appreciate the simple joys that are always available to us.
And perhaps it also involves exploring practices like mindfulness and meditation,
Yes.
which can help us tap into that inner wellspring of peace and joy that's always present, just waiting to be discovered.
Indeed, the path to liberation is a journey, and it's one that we can all take, one step at a time, one moment at a time.
Yeah.
And as we cultivate wisdom, compassion, and skillful action, we might just find that the greatest pleasure lies in the journey itself.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We encourage you to continue exploring, to keep questioning, and discover for yourself the transformative power of the Buddhist path of practice. Until next time, keep diving.